Hey guys, Joe here. This is Pocket with Joe. I am joined by Nick Alberga here this morning. We're going to be talking his story into the industry as well as breaking down a couple of these upcoming games. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope we have like 3 hours because it's a really, really long and winding story.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it, Nick. Your nickname is the Golden Muzzy. Anyone
Yeah.
looking to follow you on Twitter and IG can find you there. How did you get that nickname? Let's start
So
with
it's
that.
yeah, it's one of the most common questions I get, and I wish the answer was better than it's going to be. But long story short, when I started broadcasting about 12 years ago in new media class, our professor said it was a smart idea to create a Twitter account. So we did, and it was Movember. Long story short, I used to be a smoker. I came in a bit blonde, my mustache. So I was like, why not the Golden Muzzy? Because it was Movember when all this happened, and I like to grow a mustache for cancer awareness and research. So I had the Muzzy going. I'm like, why not the Golden Muzzy? Thinking it would just be sort of a dabble, wouldn't be a thing. And then next thing you know, 12 years later, I have almost 20,000 followers, and people call me Muzzy. It's crazy how it works out. So I wish the story was a bit better than that one.
That's still a great story. I like it. You're doing it for a good cause as well. Are you going to be doing Movember this season?
So I just had the duster. I'm not sure if you saw. We did a YouTube fantasy draft on the YouTube for the NHL, and I brought the duster out just to be on brand with the Golden Muzzy. But long story short, I normally do come out with a bit of a modification every year to my mustache. So yeah, I'll be doing it. I think it's a great sort of thing to do.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Okay, let's talk about what you have going on now, and then we'll jump into how you got started. So, what's happening now for you? I know we can find you all over.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I actually inked a new deal with the Network, and Daily Face Off. And part of my new gig will be hosting a daily digital YouTube show called Leafs Morning Take alongside former Maple Leaf Jay Rosehill. So we'll be covering the ins and outs of the Toronto Maple Leafs. That launches next Wednesday, by the way, on the Nation Network YouTube page. Make sure to subscribe, listen. It'll be pretty much available wherever you get everything in your podcast. So anytime, anywhere you want to listen, you'll be able to do so. I write for the LeafsNation.com, so a big portion of my job is covering the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then on top of that, as you know, I'm big into the fantasy game, so I'll be doing some fantasy pieces as well for the Daily Face-Off fantasy portion, as well as continuing to co-host the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast. So suffice it to say, I'll be rather busy again this season.
Yeah, it's going to be an insanely busy season for you. I'm excited to see all of your content coming out. Now, let's talk about how you got started. 12 years ago, you made this your Twitter handle. I love it. How did you get started in the industry?
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. Like ever since I was 10, I'm now 33. I've always wanted to be sort of a sports broadcaster. My first sport, my first love was actually baseball, which people don't realize because I cover hockey. So I'm big into baseball, big into basketball, big into the NHL as well. But pretty much, it was something that came together like randomly in terms of got an internship out of school in broadcasting school. It happened to be NHL Network Radio. Next thing you know, things fell into place, and I had a full-time job at NHL Network Radio. And then lo and behold, I spent 8.5 years there as a show host and producer before landing at Sportsnet for a couple of years, and now with the Nation Network and Daily Face-Off. So it's a lot of it was right place at the right time to start off the career. But I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to anybody starting off in broadcasting would just, say yes to everything, do your thing, spread your wings. And the more accessible and versatile you are, the easier it's going to be to get into this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. That is some great advice. Now, how nerve-wracking was it for you that first time you stepped in front of a mic, or did it just come naturally to you?
I would say a bit of both. I think anybody who says the first time behind a mic they weren't nervous is crazy. Having said that, I had a lot of experience. Did a four years of school, 2 at a college in London, Ontario, where we pretty much ran a radio station the second year. So I had the experience of doing news and sports and weather and all that stuff. I think practice makes perfect. The more reps you get, the better you'll be and the more credibility you'll get. So to answer your question, yeah, I was nervous, but I think you get used to it. It's like any job, right? Like you have the nerves that build up. Broadcasting the same way. You turn on that mic or that camera turns on, you feel a bit funky, a bit different, but it's a good funky. It's a good different.
Do you almost feel now that it's kind of a flick of a switch as soon as you get in front of that microphone, no matter what is happening during your day, you're focused and you are on task to what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, it's second nature, but it's really, really intriguing too. And I think a lot of people who are not in broadcasting don't realize it. You always have to be on. Like, even if you're having like a really shitty day, you sort of have to turn it on, right? And I think that's what's different about this industry than, like, say, your conventional 9 to 5 job, where it's, even if you're not feeling great, you can get by with your day. It's different. If there's a microphone, if there's a camera in front of you, you have to act like nothing else matters in the world, and you're there to, conduct and give your material, right? So, like, that's sort of the biggest difference, I would say, in that respect, when looking at the industry and sort of how you have to be on 24/7.
Oh, you absolutely do. Now, Nick, if you could do anything else, if you didn't take this career path, where do you think you would have been?
Ooh, that's a good question. Again, it's such a crazy story because, like, since I've been 10, I've wanted to be, a broadcaster, a sports broadcaster, but it's something you have to mull over being in this industry because, for anybody watching and listening, I mean, it's not rosy every day, if you know what I'm saying, right? There are moments where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work out, but you got to stick with it. You got to believe in yourself. I think it would be something in sports. I can guarantee you of that. Marketing, PR, something around broadcasting. I know it's a cop-out answer, but I'm just so passionate, and I'm not kidding when I tell you my life revolves around sports. I play sports, I talk sports, I watch sports. So it's got to be something in sports.
Yeah, you have to be in this industry. You have
Yeah.
to have that absolute passion for it. Where did that original passion come from? Did you grow up in a family that loves sports?
So again, long story short, I was born in Montreal, but I grew up about 30 minutes west of Toronto, where I still reside to this day, although I live downtown Toronto, but my family lives in a place called Oakville. And my dad was a big time Montreal Canadiens fan growing up. So right away, hockey was a big thing in my family, although I didn't live in Montreal long enough to become a Canadiens fan. In fact, I grew up a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. That's since changed a bit. I mean, just covering the league the way I have for the last 12 years or so, it really desensitizes you, and you just love watching the game. That's pretty much how I'd showcase myself now. But it's just a thing I've taken a loving to since a very, very young age. I mentioned the fact that I was obsessed with baseball when I was 5 or 6 years old. So that's something I've played to this day. I play softball. I just, people go through I should say, different paths. Mine was always a sports path where I was that kid who pretty much tried everything, with exception of football. You might hate me for this, but football is the one sport I cannot get behind, sadly.
Really? I don't hate you for that. Everyone has one sport. I couldn't hold that against you, Nick. You're a hockey
Thank
fan.
you.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about your dad's favorite team, Montreal Canadiens. Any hopes for them this season?
So they're a fascinating team. Long story short, I still have a lot of family in Quebec, so they are near and dear to my heart for sure. I was at the draft at the Bell Center in June. That was a lot of fun. Montreal selecting Juraj Slafkovský, the Slovakian, first overall. I think only time will tell, if he can stick in the league this year. But I think the prospects look bright for the future of that organization. I think there could be a lot of pain still this season in their progression and dealing out some contracts, but some of the younger players like Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovský, like, they're going to build around these kids. And I would say in the next 2 to 3 to maybe 4 years, Montreal is going to be a serious contender because they're sort of in the rebuilding mode, and that's okay. So probably that's the way I would phrase it. I think especially when it comes to the Atlantic Division, I think it's unlikely that Montreal will compete for a playoff spot this season, but they're on the upward trajectory right now for sure.
Okay, and then you will be covering the Toronto Maple Leafs this season. Lots of people have high hopes for this team. Can they make it through that first round of the playoffs, though?
That's the big question, right? It's been 18 years since the Maple Leafs have won a playoff series. I can't believe it. I'm 33 now. By my math, I was like 15, something like that. It's probably off, but it was a long ass time ago, is what I'm telling you, Joe. The biggest question mark with this Leafs team is their goaltending situation, right? Like, they bring in 2 new guys, a guy in Matt Murray who's got the pedigree, won 2 Stanley Cups earlier on in his career, but he just can't stay healthy and he can't stay consistent, right? Like, he got demoted to the AHL at some point in time last season too. So it's between him and Ilya Samsonov, who the Washington Capitals wanted no part of. So, like, that's the biggest concern, I think, from Leafs Nation and their standpoint is will they get the save when it matters most? And that's been a question for a variety of years, but I think it still stings to lose a guy like Jack Campbell, who's now with Edmonton.
Absolutely. Yeah, a huge addition for the Edmonton Oilers, but I hear you. I was actually shocked that they let him go. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be an interesting season overall. We know it kicks off on Friday with a game in Prague between the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators. Any thoughts on this? Predators coming in as the favorite.
Yeah, looking forward to this. It goes without saying, a big reason why is I love the city of Prague. I love Europe. I've been to a ton of countries in Europe, and Prague was Czech Republic, I should say, was one of my favorites. So I think it's so great, first and foremost, that the NHL is back doing these games in Europe. So yeah, there'll be a home and home set. San Jose and Nashville starts on Friday. I'm always curious looking at the over to start the season. I know it's set at 5.5. I think teams are a bit sloppy to start. There's a bit of jet lag for sure with San Jose and Nashville. So I would lean towards the offense in that game. I'll be looking at some shot props, Tomas Hertl, guys like that, Timo Meyer. I think both teams are going to be trigger happy. It's the first couple games of the season. You're excited to be back. And Nashville is the better team, but I wouldn't sleep on San Jose because it always seems like the line is a bit leery in one direction or the other. So I might look at San Jose in the first game. I think they're going to split the first two, quite frankly.
Okay, I like the way that you're looking at this. We know the Sharks have added depth to their forwards, their top two lines, really producing last season. Their defense, as well as the defense of the Predators, just were letting both of these teams down last season. So that over looks beautiful. If you can get 5.5, you guys, go grab them because I'm seeing 6s now, Nick.
Oh, okay. So I jumped in at 5.5 the other day.
Yeah.
I think it's important to know, maybe you look at the over more specifically in the second game, depending on what that number is, expecting the backups to play in the back half of the back-to-back there. So that's probably where I would draw in. And it's just intriguing because you have Saros in the Nashville crease. He's one of the best goaltenders on the planet. And then James Reimer going for the San Jose Sharks. I still have that feeling that we're going to see some offense, but yeah, maybe they're leaning towards like a 4-2 final. So I'm happy I got in at 5.5 there.
I'm glad you did. Great way to get in on that. Now let's look at the season overall. Is there anyone that you're high on coming into this season?
Yeah, so there's an abundance. I mean, we can start with the conversation when you look at Florida and the Calgary Flames. They pull off the biggest blockbuster of the offseason. Jonathan Huberdeau now with the Calgary Flames, Matthew Tkachuk now with the Florida Panthers. I think there's probably a short list, Joe, of like 5 or 6 teams who can win the Stanley Cup this season. You have to start with the Colorado Avalanche looking to repeat. Let's not forget the last couple of years, there's been a couple teams that I should say that have repeated in the form of Pittsburgh and the Tampa Bay Lightning. So never discount that. Any team with Cale Makar, any team with Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, the list goes on and on. Even when they lose Nazem Kadri, they're going to be a formidable threat. I think when you look at the Eastern Conference as well, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Florida Panthers, I'm always cautious to throw the Maple Leafs in that conversation because they haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. It's been a long, long time. But more so like maybe they're overdue, maybe they're due. I think I would throw them into the conversation. The St. Louis Blues, the Calgary Flames, the Edmonton Oilers, those types of teams. Yeah. So I would probably say, again, the short list is probably up to about 7 teams that I just mentioned, but they're very likely, one of those 7 teams, very likely, in my opinion, to win the Stanley Cup this season.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. Were you shocked that the Colorado Avalanche let go of Darcy Kemper going over to the Capitals?
I wasn't shocked. Again, and that's been a theme with Joe Sakic the last couple of years. If you don't like his number, then get the hell out. That's pretty much what happened with Darcy Kemper. He got the money in Washington, and good luck to him. And they really didn't owe Kemper anything. He won them a Stanley Cup. Was he great? Not really. I think that's the amazing story about Colorado winning last year is they got pedestrian goaltending from whoever was playing in there, whether it was Francouz, mostly Darcy Kemper. He wasn't that great. So I think it showed that it wouldn't be smart in their best interest, especially with their cap situation, to pay a goalie $5-6 million the way Kemper got paid by the Washington Capitals. So I actually think they made the better move acquiring Alexander Georgiev, who could form a tandem here with Pavel Francouz. I think Georgiev has the upper hand to be the number 1 right now. And I like that decision better than re-signing Darcy Kemper. I didn't expect it from the beginning.
That's a great point. I love what Colorado is able to do defensively, getting those block shots on goal. So pedestrian goalies in net, you're right. They can really put anyone they want in there and not put that high pressure on them. Okay, I have to ask, anyone that you're really low on this season that you just think is going to really struggle?
So that's the big story too. There's a kid coming up in the draft next June. His name is Connor Bedard, and for years he's been linked to Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid to be in sort of that threshold. And I think anytime you hear that, your eyebrows raise, at least bushy ones like mine, and you're like, holy crap, like here we go, right? So like there's going to be intrigue to see, who potentially could get that first overall pick. Now, it's harder to tank in this day and age in the NHL than say it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, because even if you finish last, you only have about a 25% chance of landing the first overall pick. But I'll say, the teams that are very likely to be bad include Chicago. They've dumped their entire team. Patrick Kane's the next to go, perhaps Jonathan Taves as well, and Arizona. I think those two teams will be vying for contention when it comes to being the worst team in the NHL this season. And at this point, again, the math isn't in their favor, but I think it's very likely Connor Bedard, who is very expected to go first overall, ends up with either Chicago or Arizona next year.
Oh, you'd hate to be him and ending up with those worst teams. We know what happens, though, out of these guys first in the draft. Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on Pocket with Joe. Who's hoisting the Stanley Cup before we go?
All right, so I have Carolina and Calgary in my Stanley Cup final, and I'm doubling down from last year where my preseason pick was Colorado against Carolina. I had Colorado winning the cup in the preseason. I just think they were far and away the favorite. I still think they're likely this year, but I'm going to go off the map a bit and say, again, Carolina and Calgary in my Stanley Cup final, and I'm going to take the Carolina Hurricanes to win the Stanley Cup this season.
You almost became my best friend there. I'm a Calgary Flames fan. I thought you were going to take us, but I'm sorry. Can't be best friends today, Nick, but
I think they're in a better position to dethrone Colorado. I'll say that. And for Carolina's sake, they need a goaltender. They need competent goaltending in the playoffs, in the Stanley Cup final, if they get there, to actually win it all. But I really like the depth. Max Pacioretty, love that pickup. He's going to be hurt for about half the season, return in time for the stretch run. I like the depth, but I'm not discounting Calgary either. Love the Kadri pickup. Love what they've done in tweaking their roster, bringing in Huberdeau at 115 points last year. Mackenzie Weegar's a stud on the back end. Like, there's tons of depth. And I think Jacob Markstrom, the number one goaltender there, is looking obviously for a bounce back playoff after he was just really, really disappointing and he got dismantled by the Edmonton Oilers. So, yeah, I like Calgary a bit, and I think either one of those two teams could win this year.
Yeah, Markstrom has to get the Oilers out of his head. They seem to always have his number. So if we can get past the Edmonton Oilers and for Markstrom, I think you are right here. I'd love to see them in the Stanley Cup Finals. But Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Can you remind everyone where to find you, where to check out all of your content?
How could they forget at this point? At the Golden Muzzy on Twitter. I'm pretty much everywhere, continuing to host NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast alongside Pete Jensen. So make sure you subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcast. It's a must listen, especially if you play fantasy hockey. And also over at the Nation Network, Leafs Morning Take launches next Wednesday alongside Jay Rosehill. I'll be working with him doing a daily digital YouTube show. And again, you can catch it on the Nation Network YouTube page. And I'm also writing on the LeafsNation.com and Daily Faceoff. So long-winded, but I've got a variety of different roles as I've laid out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick is everywhere, you guys. Go make sure you give him a follow on IG and Twitter so you can find him on his shows at the Golden Muzzy. Nick, again, absolute pleasure. Best of luck in this season, and I hope to do it again soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.